Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another podcast episode of the Daniel Teaches Experience. Folks, we've been doing this for like 80 plus episodes. Isn't that nuts? I was just thinking about it the other day, man. I've got over 100 videos on YouTube, 80 plus podcast episodes. Each one's at least 30 minutes long. Do you know how many hours of content that is? How many things I've talked about either by myself solo or bringing someone else on the podcast? Man, the things we've discussed. How am I going to keep going? Like, at what point do I just run out of ideas? Well, hopefully, the moment I cover one idea, the next day I learn something new, so that it'll be an ongoing system. And if I stick true to my word and I never stop learning, this podcast should never stop in theory. Folks, thank you so much for joining me. If this is your first time listening to me, my name is Daniel. I'm a psychology student. I'm a podcaster, YouTuber, overall content creator. I love sharing the things that I read in my textbook, find in lectures, and basically taking those theories and stripping away all that extra nonsense and applying it to real life. Because what really matters, in my opinion, is the practicality. So that's what I'm here to do. Every different episode of this podcast is about different things. Some of them are about relationships, suicide, different mental disorders, happiness, views on things like video games. That was last week's episode. Today, my friends, we're going to talk about a big topic. When people think about mental health and when people think about mental health disorders, there is one kind of idea that always rears its ugly head. It's the A word. Well, if you looked at the title of this, you already know. I'm talking about anxiety. Folks, let's break down anxiety. First and foremost, anxiety is 100% normal. It is a normal human emotion and we all experience it. I've never met someone who says anxious. I don't know what that means. I've never gotten anxious before in my life. Now, what's really important to make a distinction between is this. There's a difference between you have a test coming up, you feel a little anxious. You're taking out your crush on a date, you feel a little anxious. Versus every day you leave your house, you're getting anxious. You're afraid to go into the grocery store because what will people think, what will people say? And you start sweating profusely, right? So anxiety is a normal emotion, but just like anything, I would say, even like, really you can take a step back, happiness, anger, sadness. If you take something and you do it for a prolonged period of time, it's weird. It's not exactly normal. If you have someone who's only happy 24/7, 365 days a year, you're going, that's not quite normal. I'm not saying it's a bad thing necessarily, but I'm saying too much of an emotion has obvious consequences. I think being upset is an important emotion. And it's good to be upset. I think being angry is an important emotion. But again, I think when you're angry over a prolonged period, when you're upset over a long period, 2 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 years, that's when damage can really start to occur. And really, to further that thought, it's one thing if you feel anxious. It's another thing when that anxiety starts interfering with your day-to-day life. So when you go to work, when you attend to your hobbies, when you attend to your relationships, and now that anxiety is interfering and not allowing you to live to your fullest potential, well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we have ourselves a problem now. So you sit back and go, well, what is anxiety? Well, what does it feel like to feel anxious? And I want you folks to think about, for some of you, maybe you guys don't get anxious often, and you might only get anxious if you're going for a job interview or if it's one of those unusual events. Some other people who listen might get anxious pretty often. That could be whenever they're going to a party and they feel like people are going to be there who they don't know. That could be talking to the opposite sex of whom they're attracted to. You could feel anxious. That could be for tests. That could be for studying. I know, myself speaking, one of the biggest things that makes me anxious is procrastination. I know a lot of people, not saying that procrastination is a bad thing necessarily. I mean, you have to figure out what works for you. But I'm a person who, if I have a task, I want to get it out of the way as soon as I can. If I let it linger over my head, I can't fully enjoy watching TV, going out for a walk, because it's, I'm like, oh man, I got to get this done. And that makes me anxious. It's the suspense. It's almost worse than actually getting the reading done or the homework done. So folks, we have to understand, first of all, in our society, we are so used to looking at that word anxiety in a negative context, right? Oh, he's talking about anxiety. Anxiety must be a bad thing. Not necessarily. See, folks, there's a psychological concept known as flow. And the idea of flow was this. if you want the best out of an individual, to be in a zone where they forget about time, they forget about space, nothing else matters, and they are in the zone, it is something that has to be to a certain degree where it is stimulating enough so that you try your hardest, but it's not too hard. So that you're like, dude, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to give up. If it's too easy, it's bored. You're going to get bored. Dude, I'm not going to put any effort. If it's too hard, you're going to go, no matter how much effort I put in, it's not going to be enough, so you quit. But if there's that right amount of skill and difficulty, that's when we're good. So why am I introducing this? Well, one thing that anxiety attempts to do is it attempts to put us in a state to deal with an oncoming challenge. So if I'm worried about, let's say, a test coming up, from an evolutionary perspective, our brain does not a good job of differentiating that and our village is about to be attacked by another rival village, or a saber-toothed tiger is about to attack us. What it's going to do, and this is very similar to excitement, this is very similar to nervousness, is your body's basically going to, imagine like there's like a turbo button on something. I don't know, I'm trying to think of like a, let's say like something like, let's say if you have like an electrical shaver to shave your beard, right? And then you've got the different stages of intensity, and then you got a turbo button, you press it, and then it goes even more. Basically, folks, what happens is your body goes into this overcharge, this above the normal excitement and powerful in terms of speed kind of form. And what happens is this, the vessels that transport your blood, so these are your arteries and these are your veins, they actually expand. And in doing so, you experience larger blood flow. While this is happening simultaneously, your heart actually beats faster. So when you're nervous, when you're excited, when there's adrenaline pumping, your heart starts beating faster. Those vessels that transport your blood, they expand. Folks, what is in our blood? It's a ton of nutrients, including oxygen. So now, all those nutrients that would regularly get to your vital organs, such as your lungs and like your liver, your kidney, they not only get there, but they get there at a faster rate than they would beforehand. What happens? Your body gets extra charged. It's almost like you're taking a drug and your body goes into overdrive. So now guess what? You can run a little bit faster. You can fight a little bit harder. You can jump a little bit higher. You can lift a little bit more because it puts you into that state. So the problem is when we start to feel overly anxious, let's say for a test, my brain thinks, oh my God, there's a saber-toothed tiger. So what happens is exactly what I said, right? Heart rate increases. Breathing intensifies. What you'll notice is sometimes you might feel nauseous because you won't feel hungry at all. Sometimes even you'll feel some, I'm not want to say swelling of the throat, but you won't feel hungry at all. Like your brain realizes, oh my God, I'm in a survival mode. So you go into this like this fight or flight mode and you get ready for something. But the thing is, in this day and age, folks, the saber-toothed tiger isn't going to show up, right? The enemy village isn't going to attack you. So you end up being supercharged for a test, and guess what? Being that supercharged, putting your body in this fight or flight mode has its consequences. And the consequences are, if you're normally going at a certain rate, and being in that intense state rises it up, so now you're using extra brain processing, you're using your muscles to their fullest extent, there's a drop-off, right? With everything. When we gotta give. That's the only way that it works. Yin and yang, baby. This is how caffeine works in coffee. Where let's say we're feeling a 5 out of 10. If 10 is super alert and 1 is not alert at all, we're a 5 out of 10. We drink coffee, now we're an 8 out of 10, right? But when caffeine wears off, we don't just return to a 5 out of 10, we go to a 3. Now, I understand that these numbers are just arbitrary. They're not actually based on objective measurement, but I want to really formulate this idea that, folks, whatever we do, whatever stress that we put our body on or our mind on, there are consequences to that action. So when we're full of adrenaline and then we're super skyrocketing and we're good and we're strong and we're fast, that comes at a cost. I don't know if you've heard people saying like they have like a social battery. And they go, yeah, man, like one time, I think a friend of mine once told me, they're like, yeah, once I went to this party and I was there for maybe 15, 20 minutes and then I left. And then I go, what happened? They went, I ran out of my social battery. Now, for myself, who's a very extroverted, I shouldn't say extroverted person, for someone who's very sociable and I love being around other people and I really relish it, and thankfully, I'm not an overthinker too much. I love being around people. And you could say that my social battery is maybe a little greater than the next person, but essentially what my friend was telling me was, he said, Daniel, it takes me so much energy to expend in those social interactions that I feel exhausted after 20 to 25 minutes. Now, mind you, he went to a party where he knew almost everyone. He knew almost everyone at this party. And yet, when he was in there, he got physically tired. Folks, the brain and the body are connected. Right? So what happens? You don't get tired the way that you would if you start lifting weight, or the way that you go out on a run, but it's different. Think of if you're studying for 2 or 3 hours, or think of if you're hardcore focusing on a concept that you really have to understand and it's tricky. For example, I'm in a class right now where I'm reading Plato, and some of the things that he's saying about philosophy, they're mind-blowing, but you really got to concentrate because the wording has been translated, so it's not 100%. It doesn't sound smooth the way me and you would talk right now. So you really got to focus, and you got to read it over and over again. You got to sit there and go, what did he mean by that? So you're using mental energy, and essentially for people who get extra anxious around others, what they end up doing is they use more, I'll use the word mental processes than me and you do, in the sense that their senses are all heightened, right? Because they're in that fight or flight mode, where someone else, maybe you're a little bit more cool, maybe you're a little bit more relaxed. Hey, so-and-so, it's good to see you. Generally, one thing that makes us a little more anxious is when we see new people who we haven't met. If you're at a job interview, if you're trying to impress someone, right? If in your mind, your brain is trying to working overtime, figuring out, okay, what does this person think of me? Am I boring them? Am I talking too much? Am I not talking enough? Let me say a joke. Oh, she didn't smile. Is that bad, right? So what we're doing is we're using our brain, and we're constantly thinking, and we're making these calculations. These are happening in a fraction of a second, folks, while our senses are taking in sound and what we're smelling, and we're taking in the surroundings, and we're hearing other conversations. There's someone to say. So there's so many things going on, and after 20 to 25 minutes, if you're someone who gets anxious, if you're someone who overthinks, folks, you've just put your brain through such a crazy obstacle course that maybe if someone else is at a party for 3 or 4 hours, they won't feel tired the way that you do. It's important to understand, folks, that anxiety to a degree is a good thing. It keeps us safe and makes sure that we don't die. One of the reasons that people lean towards alcohol and marijuana is that it acts as a depressant, meaning it slows down our blood flow, it slows down our central nervous system, it reduces the likelihood of us going into that fight or flight mode. And it's amazing if you want to, the psychology student endorsing weed and alcohol, but just for the sake of this talk, it's amazing if you want to just take a step back and relax and not get too amped up into things. The problem and one of the dangers of taking part in said activities is a little bit of anxiety is a good thing. It tells you, hey man, be careful. Don't say that. Or be careful. There's a cliff. There's a ledge. Don't push it, Or hey man, watch what you're saying. There's a professor here. Be careful what you say out loud, right? So all those things, and when you drink alcohol, when you smoke marijuana, it relaxes that voice. The pro is you're not overthinking, thank God. The con is anxiety can be the voice that could save your life, right? It's the voice that says, hey man, don't jump off the cliff. Hey man, don't speed. Don't drink and drive, Don't run into that party naked. It tries to save you from physical things and from social things, social reputation as well. So in one sense, it's important, right? So we got to play. And unfortunately, one of the things that you see is a lot of these people, they're going past the threshold of anxiety is no longer doing them a benefit. Or what do they call this? There's a certain word for it, where the cost is outweighing the potential benefits. It's prolonged anxiety over a long period of time. And you see the same thing with stress. Acute stress is actually a good thing, believe it or not. It gets your brain pumping. It's good. Again, it gets you amped up, ready to do something. You want to be a little bit more amped up when you're about to start a project, start work, meet with people. But chronic stress, dear God. I was talking to a friend of mine. He's in the nursing program. And he said, Daniel, one of the worst things that could possibly happen to an individual is they're very anxious. They overthink, they get stressed out a lot, and it puts a lot of pressure on the heart. And what happens is they end up having a constant high blood pressure, and Jesus, man, that has a plethora of horrific consequences in and of itself. But for the talk that I'm doing here, I just want to put emphasis on this. Acute stress or acute anxiety is not necessarily a bad thing. Actually, I think it's a good thing. But it's when it gets long-term. It's when it's chronic anxiety for 5-6 hours, chronic stress that lasts 6-7 hours a day, 2 days a week. I mean, it really wrecks your body. It really, really does a number on you. So that's one of the biggest things that I see people not struggling with, but they have such a hurdle to overcome. And the reason why I am so passionate about mental health and I'm so passionate about people's well-being is that, folks, it's internal. You don't see depression. You don't see depression. You might go, well, yeah, I do, Daniel. I can tell when someone's slouched over and they look upset and they're not talking. Don't get it twisted. That's not depression. Those are the symptoms of depression. You don't see it. You see its symptoms. It's different, right? You don't see the internal struggles. If someone's broken their leg, you can tell they're breaking their leg, right? If someone's got a bruise, if someone's got a cut on their head, you can see it. But if someone says they're dealing with anxiety issues or a mental disorder or God knows what they're dealing with, internally we can't see it. So what's your first thought? Your first thought is like, well, how do I know you're not lying? For attention, for benefit, for, vulnerability, so people care for you. How do I know you're not making this up? Because I can't see it. I can't feel it. I have to trust whatever you're saying. And human beings, we're very visual. So what do you do if you can't see what that other person's seeing? Maybe you've never felt what they're feeling, and you can only tell by what they're telling you. And you're going, well, I don't want you. So then that's why you hear advice like, well, just don't be anxious. Just don't think about it. Like, oh dear, oh my God, yeah. Going up to someone who has anxiety, like hardcore anxiety, and say, oh, just don't think about it. Just don't be anxious, is about as good as going to someone who just broke their ankle and say, just walk it off. Just walk it off. Just hop on one leg, right? So essentially, the heart's in the right place because you're looking for the fastest, most convenient solution. But the problem is, it looks like you're putting a Band-Aid, a temporary, I don't even want to say solution, man. Just a temporary, here, I want to say something, so the record will show that when you said your problem, I gave you a quote-unquote solution. But in reality, it's like, it's not that simple. So for people who do have chronic anxiety, for at whatever reasons it may be, the answer, in my opinion, and if you look in the literature of psychology, mental health, and well-being, it won't tell you, hey, just don't be anxious. It won't tell you, well, you're anxious and you overthink. Okay, so just think about whatever makes you anxious and just overthink. You can't afford to do that sometimes because it's dangerous. What if you're driving? What if you're at your job? What if you're in a position where you have to be present, right? And people depend on you. You don't have the luxury of just going into your mind. I believe they call it absent-mindedness, right? And you just start thinking about all these different scenarios, all these different things that can play out. My father said a really good line the other day. He said, Daniel, he said, it's really hard to be anxious if you're in the present. He said, if you're a mindful person and you're thinking about just sitting down, or you're thinking about the food that you're eating, the way you hold it in your hand, the bite, the texture of it, and you're really taking it, if you're present, it's very hard to be anxious. The moment anxiety really takes over is one, we look too far into the future and we try to plan the things that are going to happen. We try to choreograph the darkness, as you say. We try to choreograph the uncertainty, but the problem is we got no idea what tomorrow's going to be like, right? I could be stressed from morning till night thinking about, man, I'm going to go out and I'm going to have this exam and I got to make sure I do this well. I got to make sure I talk to her. I got to make sure this person understands me. And I could get hit by a bus tomorrow morning and none of that stuff happens. And that's okay. It's okay that I don't know what's going to happen because there is no ultimatum. There is no life that I can live where I know every possible reality and every possible alternative. I have to be okay with not knowing. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I can make guesses. I can say the probability of this happening is greater than the probability of this. One or two things could happen that completely derail everything. Like my class just could get canceled tomorrow. I don't know. And it's okay not to know. Folks, being a little bit scared is a part of life. Being a little bit anxious is a part of life. How can you ever be brave if you're never scared? You might look at someone and go, wow, like, he's fearless, he's not afraid of anything. It's like, okay, that's fine, but he's not brave. If you do something that you're not afraid of, there's nothing brave about that. What's brave is doing something that scares you. So if for you do get scared going up to your crush and talking to them, that's a brave thing to do for you. Do you see how important personal context is? Right? I don't take the things that scare me and just put a blanket statement and stick it on everybody. No, man, it's contextual. You can only be brave if you face the thing that scares you. Because otherwise, it wasn't scary to begin with. It's like, well, you faced it, so what? But just because something's easy for me to do doesn't mean it's easy for you to do, and vice versa. So when we get back to anxiety, the problem here is you're sitting there going, okay, Daniel, you've told us what not to do, right? You've said, well, we shouldn't say, hey, stop thinking about it. And you also said we shouldn't sit there and think about it all day long. So what should we do? Folks, one of the best things that I've read, and actually this is so small and so simple and so brilliant, it was in 12 Rules for Life, a book by clinical psychologist Dr. Jordan Peterson. He said, man, if you want to overthink, and if you have something that you need to sort out, you schedule time for yourself. You go, okay, tomorrow from 3 until 3:30, I'm going to sit down with a notebook, with a pen, and I'm just going to think. What you're doing here is, let's say you're sitting in class, let's say you're at work, or you're doing something where you don't have the luxury of thinking about it. If you say, I'm just not going to think about it, well, that makes you more nervous and more anxious because your brain's going, no, we got to think, this is dangerous. But if you think, again, you could potentially sabotage whatever you're doing in front of you. But the moment you make a compromise and you go, you know what, I will think about this, but not right now. I will think about it when I get home from 6 till 6:20. Then and only then. You go home, you sit down. For the love of God, do not do these two things. One, when you pick a time to think about it, do not let it be at night. It is so easy to lie in bed at night and start getting into these thoughts. You're going to be awake for an hour or two. Do not. Secondly, if you're going to think about these things, don't even be on your bed. Do not be on your bed. What we want to do is at nighttime, especially folks, is the moment you sit down on your bed, we want to build a association between your bed and between sleeping. The moment that your body sits down on the bed, you should be like, oh, okay, it must be nighttime. That's why I'm on my bed. That's why they recommend, like, if you can, don't eat lunch on your bed, right? Don't just chill on your bed. Chill in anywhere else part of the house, so that at nighttime, when you come sit down, your brain communicates to your body and goes, oh, my human's sitting on the bed. It must be time to sleep. All right, man, melatonin. Let's start releasing it. And that hormone makes us tired. So it all works together. So if you're going to overthink or be anxious or plan things out, you don't do it on your bed. You pick a certain area. You pick an area. You pick any area in your home. It could be at an office. It could be outside. It could be while you go out for a walk during a certain neighborhood. You're going to say, okay, this is my place. I'm going to restrict myself from thinking and getting into those thoughts. Anywhere else, as long as I am there, we're good. Right? So you do those things. So let's say you're sitting down. The benefit of sitting down and unraveling your thoughts is this. It's very similar to sitting down at an office desk. You've got a bunch of files, and they don't match at all, and they're all misdated, and they belong to different sections. And it's essentially like taking all those files and putting them into their respective folders. Having a bunch of different files on your desk, putting them into their respective folders is very similar to sitting down and just unraveling your thoughts. Why do I think this way? What is the problem? Why am I feeling anxious? Okay, I'm feeling anxious because of this. All right. What is the best possible scenario that could happen? Scenario A, write it out. Okay, where is the second best possible scenario that could happen? Scenario B. What is the third best scenario that could happen? Scenario C. What is the worst possible thing that could happen? Why does this make me anxious? What is the worst outcome that could possibly happen? You write that down. And one thing that we do, folks, is our thoughts are very abstract and they come and go. And what we try to do is you want to grab them and you want to make it as concrete as possible. You want to ground your thoughts. You want to put it there and you want to look at it. So if you can write those down and look at them in front of you, this isn't for anybody. This is not for your parents. This isn't for your friends. Just for yourself on a piece of paper, on a Google Doc, on Microsoft Word, and just look at it. That in and of itself decreases your anxiety like no other. I can't even begin to talk about the benefits, because the moment your brain starts writing things down, you can see it. Remember I was talking about uncertainty and darkness, right? One of the beauties of writing things down is you're kind of going to that uncertainty and you're reaching out into that darkness and you're bringing it right in front of you. So contrary to popular belief, you think you want to keep the scary stuff away. You want to bring it right in front of you. Why? Because something scary is extreme. Here's exactly why. In horror movies, they figured out something that changed the landscape of horror movies forever. They found out that if they keep the monster or the ghost in the darkness, if they don't actually show it on screen, your imagination will think of the worst thing imaginable, scarier than anything that the director or the costume designers can come up with. Think about that for a second. They realized that the scariest thing that horror movies can do is they don't show the ghost or the demon or the monster. They keep it in the darkness and off screen so they can let your imagination do the worst. But then when you actually see it on screen, you go, oh, that's what it looks like. It can still be scary, but it's not at that level. So when we feel anxious and when we have these terrible thoughts that weigh us down, we do the same thing. We take out a piece of paper and we write them down. This is what's making me anxious. This is why this is important. This is how I'm going to deal with it. Or these are a couple of different ways that I could deal with it if I wanted to. These are the resources that I require in order to deal with it. So what you're doing is you're doing the exact same thing. Going back to that horror movie idea, you're looking at those thoughts that you can't see, you can't touch because they're abstract. You're pulling them out of the darkness and you're putting them on paper. And when you're doing that, that immediately reduces your anxiety. That immediately makes you feel a little bit better and you go, okay, I see it in front of me. It's not like I'm going to forget. It's not like it's going to blindside me. It's right there. The problem is right there on that piece of paper. And that in and of itself. And then you wonder why things like manifesting and journaling and writing in your diary are so big, because my friends, they help. They really help. Whether you want to talk about the universe, whether you want to talk about God and karma and spirituality, go for it. That's not my world. My world is psychology. My world is well-being. And in that world, they say, folks, you write down your problems. You write down your goals. Anything abstract, anything from the darkness, you try to make it as concrete and as grounded as possible. And it has 100% been proven with empirical data through peer-reviewed articles that, yes, we've run multiple studies and it's showed that you do benefit from writing things down. Man, I was on fire the last few minutes, huh? Ooh, that was dope. All right, folks, thank you so much for listening. This was how are we going? 26 minutes? 26-minute talk on anxiety. This definitely wasn't the first time I kept up on this talk of anxiety. It definitely won't be the last time, but I think it's important to notice, keep this episode in your memories, because I promise I'll come back to this in 6 months, a year, 2 years or so, and then we can kind of see how, one, I've progressed, I've learned more, maybe I have new information to share, and it'll be interesting just for everybody all around, whether you're listening to this, how much you think that I grow over the episodes and how much you learn and how much you grow. And I'm sure this isn't the only podcast you listen to, so you compare me to the other ones and you say, oh, Daniel said this well, oh, and then Ryan said this good, and Sarah on her podcast said this, that was good. So I think it's awesome. And folks, I'm not a big share and like and all that stuff, because I want you to do what you really believe in. Don't like this episode on YouTube if you don't like it. Actually press the like button if you do like it. I thank you for listening because you enjoy it and you feel like you get some value out of it. But folks, if you have anyone in your life who is really working with anxiety and you feel like they could use a tip here or there, or certain things aren't going too amazing, and you feel like it'd be beneficial for them just to hear it from a third person, I would highly recommend that you share this episode to them for many reasons, right? And it's not to say, hey, this podcaster that I listen to has all the answers, he's super smart, he's super wise. Not at all. But it's just, hey, here's a kid who's learning a few things, one or two, about anxiety, and his 2 cents might be worth a value. So seriously, folks, and not just my podcast, but really anything, if you come up any resource for mental health or well-being related, please don't be shy to share it. Not just my podcast, but anything. Because there's some people who could really, really benefit from just hearing 3 or 4 lines that might resonate with them, and they go, oh my God, that scheduling thing is brilliant. Again, that's not my idea, that's something that I read. But I was like, wow, this is such an incredible thing. Let me come share it with all of you, and hopefully you can share it with your friends and family, and we can work towards improving everybody's mental health. Folks, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. Have an absolutely amazing day, and you will hear from me again next week. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.